Welcome to Masters of, the podcast where we have conversations with people solving the toughest, most interesting problems for big content websites. From government to education to healthcare, banking, and more. We're talking to marketing and web leaders that connect the digital user experience to their mission. We're giving the masters the mic to hear their stories. Join us to learn how they do it.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Masters of series. My name is Sara. I'm with Cludo, and this is our first ever recording of the series. And we're happy to have Graham here from Hannon Hill. And thank you so much for being our first guest.
No problem. No problem.
So yeah, today, we're going to have a casual conversation about your story, kind of the human side of vendor and higher education, how you came into this field, and then just kind of riff from there. So yeah. And also it's kind of like a good time, I feel like, for you to put your face out there, because it sounds like your role is kind of in a transitional phase.
Yeah, a little bit. You know, it's one of those things where it's one of the things I like about Hannon Hill is we're kind of allowed to put our toes in different things. So it's always a good time. It's always a good time.
Yeah, so let's get started here. If you wouldn't mind just giving us kind of your origin story and how you fell into higher education. You were at a university and now you're on the vendor side of things. So, how that came to be would be awesome.
Yeah. So I live in the same town that I went to elementary school, high school, college, everything. I live like 2 blocks from the house I grew up in, very small town. In college, I wanted to obviously go into my degree was graphic design. I was a student worker in our marketing department at the university. That kind of led to a job out of college as a web graphic designer. I don't think the university knew what that meant. I don't think they had really any plan for that, but it was a job in my hometown with a design degree, so I took it. I kind of got in at the right time. They were moving into a content management system, which was a first for the university, and they were using a content management system by the people that do like Banner. So it was at that point it was SunGuard. Now it's Luminous. They were going into that content management system. So I got into it right at the beginning of that. It took us 2 years to get migrated into that content management system, and they end of lifed it right after that.
It's kind of wild to hear that, because right now I feel like if you talk to any university, if they're not on a content management system, it's just like unheard of.
Yeah.
So you saw the other side of things.
It was. And well, of course it was 15, 16 years ago back then. So it was still early, I think, in content management systems. I mean, at that point, I was struggling with CSS and figuring out how to do that stuff. The HTML I had done was hacking my MySpace back then. But so they end of life that, and I was kind of in charge of trying to find another one, which led me to a couple CMSs that we tried out, and then we tried Cascade. And it was one of those things where it was the easiest one for me to pick up on, and so that was our decision. We stayed with Cascade for, at that point, probably 5 years, and I had looked for jobs. Our jobs never come open, so I had found a school close that was also hiring a web director, and I reached out to Hannon Hill just to say, hey, do you know what CMS they're using? Because if they were using Cascade, I was going to just light my resume up with Cascade stuff. I got an email back more saying, hey, does that mean you're looking for a job?
Oh, interesting.
I got hired in as a developer for the services team, and then it felt more, I think, for everybody that my role was better in the sales side, because I can speak very well to prospects. We working in higher ed and that experience kind of leaned better on the sales side. So I transitioned into be the sales engineer, and that's the role I've been the past 7 years.
I feel like it's so interesting that you also kind of fell into higher education. I mean, that's kind of my story too. I was working at a startup in California, and I was trying to get back to Minnesota, and I just applied at Site Improve, and they just assigned me higher education. But I fell in love with the people. It's really welcoming and inclusive.
Yeah, and it's one of those areas where I feel like you can make the biggest impact, because kind of what you're doing makes it better for the school, but that ultimately makes it better for the student. And it's one of those like that's a problem that I like solving. It's one of those things that it's like, we were students as well, so I know the frustration from the student side, and I know how that process needs to go. So being able to at least have conversations with universities and kind of at least give some ideas and feedback and stuff as we go through, whether they choose Cascade or not, it's at least nice to have those conversations.
Okay, so I just had an aha moment this year where I didn't realize I was a first generation student until like EduWeb when they were talking about it. So it's funny to think through like, how people are trying to target those first generation students, and like thinking about my experience being the first generation of my family to go on to higher education. So yeah, using those like I was a student, this is kind of like what my experience was. But I think for you too, working at a university and being able to tell those stories of how you use your first content management system plays so well with the sales or sales engineering, because that's really what my job is here. I think at Cludo, just telling the stories and like how people are using tools like to match their audience's needs, really.
Well, and especially higher ed. It's higher ed's one of those areas where terminology is very specific. If you don't understand what they're talking about or what they're referring to, it's having at least a little bit of insight into that side of things is helpful.
Right. We at Site Improve, we actually hired on Mark Greenfield just to consult us with like some of the terminology as the sales folks, because we, terms like advancement, like that was elusive to us, and other things, the academic speak, whether you're working as on the vendor side or as the student side, can be hard to navigate. So
it is. It's it was one of the struggles that we had at Jacksonville State University while I was there, was getting everybody to understand that students don't know that, just like you don't know that. Students don't need to know what department. They don't need to know advancement. They don't need to know what is a registrar. They don't need to know those things. So being able to break that mindset of, it's not like you're walking into a building. It's not like you've got, where you can look at the different signs and find you need to put the content where they're looking. Just like from you, what you were saying is, if you're calling on education and you don't know advancement or at least some type of an org structure, it's going to be hard to get to who you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like it's something that we run across all of our industries that we speak with here at Cludo, is like the website, specifically how it's organized, is more of the internal organizational structure. Like here's a department, here's their information, which works well when you have an internal staff member looking for something. But if you're using your website for marketing purposes, that can be hard for prospective students or future students to try to find that like event that's happening, or what does it cost for in-state tuition.
And it's easier, and this is one of the things that we tried to push, like it's easier for us to reorganize content into a way that makes sense to someone who doesn't know than to just make them know when they get there, oh, I need to go here because this is the department it's in. They don't need to know that at that point. They just need the information.
So kind of getting back to your origin story. So, like your day to day, previously at a university versus now on the vendor side, what are you up to every day?
So yeah, at the university, it was a lot of different things. You kind of didn't know what your day to day was going to be. We were a very small team. There was 2 of us. And we did everything from managing digital signage across campus to converting Word documents to PDFs for people, to editing the
Save.
website. Yeah.
Select the PDF.
Select PDF, and we will do that. It was usually putting out fires 9 times out of 10, while also trying to push that we need to do this, while also trying to battle the people saying, it's my website, I want it to say what I want, while trying to get them to understand that it's not their website. And today is more structured. I work from home, so we basically, my role as the sales engineer is I maintain the site that we demo out of. So a lot of my day to day is researching web trends and things that are happening, and just making sure that what we're showing prospective clients meets the needs of higher ed, especially, or really any type of organization that we're meeting with. But my main goal is to make sure that we're demoing correctly.
Right. I do feel like you said something interesting. I hear a lot of like, what are the trends from individual conversations on a day to day, and then what we see on LinkedIn, other podcasts. Obviously, AI is a topic, and enrollment cliff, and first generation students. What are some of the trends that you've seen lately, either talking to clients or just like your own research?
Well, the enrollment cliff is something that it's been a big topic amongst just us as a it came up at Hyatt Web a couple times, and so that's an interesting thing that I had never really considered. That it's like, okay,
I didn't either.
Let's kind of figure that out. But it's interesting looking at the design trends themselves, like what's coming, what's going, the focus on imagery and large imagery, but you also have to think about mobile, and you have to make sure that your stuff is optimized for mobile. How do you get a large image? There's so many things that you have to kind of battle with that. I think at least the good thing, I think trend wise, is that we're really starting to get a student first mindset. I feel like now it's more understood that the website is not for internal, even students.
Right.
It's not for internal students. They can come to your office. They can go to the office. The website's a marketing tool. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be focused and geared specifically to whoever your intended customer is, whether it's a student, whether you're a bank, whether you're a hospital, whatever your goal is, that's who you need to be geared to. And I think people are getting that. And part of it, I think, is the shift to marketing. More websites now are being controlled by the marketing team. And I think they get that more so than the IT people. I was in IT when I was at JSU. It was just one of those, that's where the website lived for so long. So I think that's the biggest trend, I think, that's at least positive.
Yeah. I do think it's kind of interesting because I've worked at, on the vendor side, and our website, it's definitely a different audience, but we only have the marketing team, touching the website, editing the website, making those decisions. Whereas it's almost always like a centralized, decentralized setup where there's some central expert, like technical marketing person at the university, but yet the content expert, the subject expert, lives within these different colleges or whatever it may be. And so there's sometimes thousands of editors. One of our clients here at Cludo told us that at any given day, there could be 1,000 pages that have been edited, which is a lot to manage if you're trying to do accessibility checks and SEO checks, all those things, standards, just branding.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's the beauty of a content management system. It's what makes that need. We have talked to 1 or 2 schools recently that aren't on a content management system, and it's like, how are you managing that?
That is hard.
Um,
That's really
you
hard.
know, it's very hard, but you know, and that's where not just the content management system, you know, thrives. It's one of the things that I think Cascade does really well is it allows you to not only share the content responsibilities to your various editors, but also know that their kind of level is different. You know, not every editor is going to be the same, but knowing that, I mean, you can, and again, this kind of goes back to, we don't need to know who owns the content. We just need to know where it needs to go. So with something like Cascade or just a content management system, you can actually give out those responsibilities and allow people to contribute where their content needs to be based on the visitor as opposed to the department. You can really get granular with stuff like that. And
Can you
managing the
say,
accessibility and all of that stuff.
yeah, I was going to say, I'm not the expert of content management systems. You are. So like, you know, can you say, hey, don't publish this page unless an title tag is.
Well, usually what we recommend is have the content go through some kind of a workflow process.
Oh yeah. Yep.
It's whether you go through their department head, which is more than likely they're not going to want to deal with it. It's going to go more through like the central web team, and it could simply be an approval. You know, it's one of those like as they're editing, they hit submit, it then just sends it to the web team. They can look at it and say yes, approve it, or like you said, if they forgot a title tag, just send it back. You know, one of the good things about Cascade is we have, you know, content checks that happen pre-submit even. So like it's going to check for spelling, broken links, accessibility. There's even more advanced accessibility checkers as well, you know, kind of down the line of that process. But it's just giving the people the ability to kind of make those changes happen. Because a lot of times you don't want to give free range to people who don't necessarily know what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know all of the little nuances. If you're like a professor or lecturer and you're like, oh, now I need to do these like 60 checks for accessibility before I launch it. That's pretty hard.
It's hard. And a lot of times accessibility changes daily. The requirements for those things change daily. So knowing what even we need to check for is hard, which is why the way that we handle content editing is more content focused as opposed to design focused.
I feel like this naturally just is a good segue to like, you know, what are some of like the secret sauces of your clients that have set up something in like Cascade CMS? I mean, you just had a user conference. I'm sure you've got some like really fun little tidbits.
There are some really, really neat things that people are doing. Far more advanced than I even had considered that you can do. Like one of the biggest things I think that Cascade does and what our clients are able to do is just sharing content in general. So like you can tag things and have them show up on multiple pages. And again, it's making it so that the non-technical people can do that. It's making it so that if someone in the news area is creating a news story, they don't have to reach out to the departments to say, hey, put this on your webpage. They just tag it with the department, and it not only shows up on their main news page, but the department that it's mentioned in. Or we've got clients that are doing a lot more like program finders where they're looking into their databases and pulling content not only onto their webpage, but into Cascade. We're really doing a lot of content personalization where you're able to personalize the experience that your end user has. So like say a student comes to your website and they're looking for something, instead of them having to find it kind of as they progress through the website, we can kind of segment them out and start giving them the information that based on their activity, we know that they're looking for. And I feel like you had mentioned AI, that's where we're going. You know, the idea of just personalizing their experience and making the website tailored content to them as opposed to them having to look for it.
That's for sure a theme that I've seen higher ed going towards is like the personalization. The amount of time you have to get somebody's attention is very limited. You got to be concise. It's got to hit at the right time, right place. And yeah, the personalization is great. For instance, parents, they're an influencer. And so maybe they want to know about the safety on campus. Being able to serve up that content from wherever it lives while they're going through your website, it's important.
Well, and this is something that that I bring up is you don't talk to people the same. You know, you don't talk to a parent the same way you would talk to a student, the same way you don't even talk to undergraduate students the way you would talk to graduate students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just the communication expectations of the different people, you know, like parents aren't interested in what fun is happening on campus. They want to know that their baby is going to be safe, that they're going to get to and from class, that there are resources available to help them should they need it, and how much is it going to cost me to have all this. Students don't care about that. They want to know what fun. I mean, it's different.
Do I belong?
It's two different experiences, right? It's the student experience that you've got to sell to the student, but that student is only half of the battle. You know, if you don't get the parent buy-in, you're not going to get the student. So you've got to be able to talk to both of them, and it's tricky, but that's where personalization is going to be really, really beneficial, because based on how they're visiting the website and the pages they're looking at, you go, oh, this is going to be a parent. Let's shift and start showing content based on that person being a parent, whether that be altering your navigation, whether it be literally altering sections of content. But I think that's going to be powerful. I think that's going to be the next phase. And I think that's another trend that we could say that is coming for sure.
Right. I feel like we have a lot of functionality that could intertwine. I mean, you know, your Clive could feed into our audiences. And so, like, why not, you know, extend that hand and see how better we can integrate our solutions and make it so it's easy for clients to work together.
Well, and especially something like search, you know, and it's usually a very important topic for our clients, because searching the website is almost as important as the website itself. Because if your search isn't effective, your website's not going to be effective, because that's usually if I can't find it, I'm just going to search for it. You know, that's usually the mindset. So yeah, search is vital.
Yeah, I think I've heard like agencies as well as, you know, other vendors talking about how people search first, or maybe use the navigation and then search. And if they can't find it, they go outside the website. So you could lose a potential prospective, you know, student that way. But, you know, other than that, just frustration level, or having people call in, or just simple questions that admissions have to answer over and over again, rather than just having that top of the funnel figure it out on the website.
And I think that's where the focus is shifting to understanding who your target is. And I think we're going, but that's also, it ties into having a good search, because that way, when they do use the search and they do need the search, it's going to be more effective, because I would imagine better structured and formatted content, especially for you, is going to be much more effective from a results standpoint.
Music to my ears.
As opposed to something that's just thrown out there.
But we can work with that too. You have control over the index, and you can pull out what you want to make important. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're working on like re-architecting the website, I'm like, oh, your next step, come to us. I feel like the other thing I wanted to, I mean, can we go back a little bit and just talk about, because I wanted to understand the like COPE, and it's create once, publish everywhere.
Yes.
Is there a method to that madness, or like, you know, what are the recommendations for that?
Well, it's one of those where we kind of build from the ground up the whole concept of COPE from a CMS perspective, where you're creating the content in one place. That's the co part of it, the CO. You're creating it inside of your content management system. That content needs to be able to kind of go wherever you need it to go. You know, with Cascade, since the content itself is separate from the design, we just want the editors of the content to focus explicitly on the content. Since it's actually separate, they can share that content wherever they need it to go. They can tag it with specific departments. They can publish it out as like an RSS feed that needs to be pulled into something else. So it's one of those things where, by really focusing on the content, it allows you to just create that content and publish it out wherever it needs to go. Again, whether that is a little snippet of it that needs to show up on multiple pages because it's a news article, or if it's an event, or an entirely different version of it that needs to show up on a digital sign, or something else that may need to be pushed into a portal via an RSS feed. It's just kind of maintaining that flexibility of where the content, and knowing that content doesn't need to live in one place and it needs to be able to be shared and just repurposed. One term that I heard last year maybe that I love is source of truth. You need one source of truth of content. You don't need to have like 4 or 5 different places that content comes from, because ultimately most of those are going to be outdated. Think of because I'm sure we both went to college at the point of printed course catalogs and things like that, where it was outdated the minute it was printed, or encyclopedias where the encyclopedia that we were looking at was already wrong because science moves quicker than that. Well, your website's the same. So, we would have so many people wanting to put the tuition rate on their page for some strange reason, but they don't ever go back to make sure that it's updated. You've got people seeing tuition from 4 years ago. Well, let's not do that. Let's pull the tuition rate from a central place so that those who maintain it and it gets updated.
I think it's an interesting concept, because what I've run across too is just people wanting like maybe a microsite for some kind of campus priority. And so what they're having to do is create a microsite and copy and paste content from different departments. And maybe it's just showing off, all the different events and projects that they're doing towards like environmental conservation. What's happening is there's just like this duplication of work when maybe it doesn't need to happen. I mean, we at Cludo could potentially, crawl across these different instances and then pull it into a site. So that's one unique use case I found. But like with the COPE, if everyone's on the same content management system, like then you could potentially just
you tag it, or no, exactly. And that kind of goes back into, understanding user roles and understanding those kind of things. With Cascade, creating that microsite is easy. And then basically you just figure out what content you need, and you either assign people that would be the owner of that, so you don't have to even worry about copying it from somewhere. You can just say, okay, you're in charge of this specific paragraph, and you can get as granular as saying, okay, I want you to edit this content right here. Or you can say, okay, well, we know we need to pull in on this microsite, we know we need to pull in news that's this specific category. Well, then when you're creating the news, you just tag it with that specific category, and it's going to automatically flow into that microsite. And it's just, again, the source of truth, but also just making it easier. It doesn't have to be complicated. Content is content, and just don't overthink it.
Right. I feel like my aha moment was probably, I know this is so small, but like the whole different audiences and how you speak to them.
Yeah.
Parents versus students. I've thought of it, but I forgot about it. And so like that time was really interesting.
Yeah, it's especially the content personalization stuff. It's stuff it's so simple. A lot of times it's complicated. It's like, don't overthink it. You don't talk to people the same. Or it could be something simple like updating a heading. If you know that they're returning, just welcome them back.
Right. That's so nice.
And then just move on. I feel like I have like an aha moment once a week.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh. And then it's like, oh. Especially with what I'm doing. A lot of times just like that aha moment could have a lot of different implications on what I'm doing. I've spent a lot of time on this, but that's not a trend anymore. Yeah. The aha moments are fun, and that's what you get from conferences. That's what's the beauty of going to the conferences, because you sit there with people and you're like, oh, that's awesome. Or you're sitting there talking and they're like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. The aha moment too for me was at EduWeb, where somebody said, students don't know the difference between graduate program in graduation from high school, which
Right.
also is kind of like your point of like speaking to graduate students versus undergraduate students. It might be a little bit different because they're thinking we're just from high school, like graduation means something different to me. Whereas if you're more in the professional realm of your education, then you're like, yeah, graduate programs. That makes sense.
Well, I remember, and this kind of ties into that. I remember my very first web aha moment. I remember it. We were doing usability testing before we knew it was usability testing. We were going to the local schools and meeting with their senior level computer classes and just having them surf the website and kind of getting their feedback and stuff. My first ever aha moment was listening to them, because we'd be like, where would you go to find this? Oh, we'd go to the admissions office. Where would you go to find housing information? Oh, we would go to admissions. Well, where would you go to find how much it's going to cost? Admissions. And it was like, why? And they're like, well, that's who's talking to us.
Oh, yeah. That's the personal connection.
Yeah. They didn't know there was a separate department. Again, going back to the silos, they didn't know that there was a housing office. And, watching them surf and doing that, it's like, oh, we've got it wrong. We're focused on the wrong thing. We're overthinking it. Don't overthink it. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
They want to be admitted. They go to the admissions office. That's where all that information should be. And then from there, it's like, oh, okay. And then it flows at that point. But that was my first one. It's like, as a designer, don't design for yourself. The minute you design for yourself is the minute that you're going to spend 4 hours on something. And they're going to be like, no, that's not what I wanted. It's like, oh, you're right. That's not what you wanted. That's what I wanted.
Yep. That's got to be the hard part, being so creative, is having to design something that's not your preference. But
yes. and having to be okay with it. That's the struggle of any designer. But it's also the challenge, right? It's that good challenge of, how do I get them what they want or need by making them think it's what they wanted?
Yeah. Asking the right questions, I think, is
asking the right questions. But it's also leading. It's the same thing with a journey on a website. It's you're going to get them to the information if your journey is there.
Mm-hmm.
If you create and structure your content correctly, they're going to get where they need to go. It's all problem solving, which I wish I had thought about problem solving that way in math in college, but I didn't.
I know. I get into the real world and I'm like, I did love math. The list goes on, and it's really fun. It's a lot of problem solving. It
is. I like a challenge, and it's fun sometimes to come in every day and be like, all right, what are we doing? What's the challenge today?
Well, I will thank you, Graham, for joining us on our first series, Masters of. We did it.
Yeah, we did it. We made it.
And I will leave on one final question for you. If we were to invite somebody to the Masters of series, this could be somebody that you look up to. It doesn't even have to be somebody that needs to be on this series. It could just be somebody we should be paying attention to or following on LinkedIn, but somebody who has inspired you, or maybe somebody who's behind the scenes that's inspired you, that has something to say that could benefit this whole community.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I know. I'm sorry. I put you on the spot.
That's on the spot. I tell you, one, and this is within our own company. One person that pops into my mind is our marketing person, Chris.
Chris, yes.
He really just goes all in, and it's incredible the stuff that he does, and his LinkedIn presence, and how just he's like a sponge. He wants to soak in everything. So he would.
I agree. I know him from afar.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met him personally, but I'm like, he is so vulnerable. He's willing to share. He's
willing to not only share, but I think more importantly, sometimes you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to jump out there. And he goes all in, and it's fantastic. So I think he would be great. But there's so many names that pop into my mind just from I think his name is Bart Kaler. I think he's on LinkedIn. He is great. I know we've used him a couple times for webinars. I love following his stuff on LinkedIn.
Me too.
There's so many different routes you could go with just marketing stuff, because it's a beast.
It really is. There's so many things to think of.
So many different things to think of, and everybody has their own opinion, and nobody's wrong. Because it's like, all right, let's try all of it. So that's I don't even know if I answered the question. I don't know.
You did. 2 people. It was above and beyond, overachiever. But thank you, Graham, for your time today. And until next time, I guess I'll see you at a next conference. And
I'll see you there.
Have a great day.
You too.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.